with plenty of sunshine, particularly in the south. Friday, Saturday look increasingly sunny across the country and warmer.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
It's 12 o'clock and welcome to The Briefing with me, Liam Halligan, standing in for my friend Gloria De Piero here on GB News TV, DAB+, digital radio and online. Here's what's coming up over the next hour. The Chris Pincher story's not going away and Number 10's getting into a mess over what the PM knew and when. Our political editor Darren McCaffrey will bring us the latest. And Deputy Leader Angela Rayner, she'll be asking an urgent question on standards in public life. We'll bring you that live from the House of Commons. And were you affected by yesterday's fuel protests, and who do you blame? When it costs £100 to fill up an average car, the cost of petrol is a huge issue for many households and firms. We hear from Howard Cox from Fair Fuel UK campaign group. And Labour leader Keir Starmer says he now wants to make Brexit work. He wants the battle over Brexit to be finished. And Labour, he says, doesn't want to reverse the 2016 referendum, even though he argued precisely that before becoming Labour leader. Our Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie helps us to read the Brexit runes, and he tells us what Keir Starmer's shifting Brexit stance could mean for the ongoing wrangling over the Northern Ireland Protocol. Also, with war in Ukraine and the world feeling increasingly dangerous, should we beef up the British Army? Labour MP Barry Shearman says that yes, we should. He'll be joining me live. And we also meet Johnny Wood, whose sister was killed by a stolen lorry travelling at twice the speed limit. He and his MP are calling for tougher sentences for dangerous driving. And as always, we want to hear from you. Email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet @gbnews. This is Liam Halligan in for Gloria De Piero with you for the next hour, so stay with us for The Briefing.
Good afternoon, it's just 2 minutes past 12. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Deputy Labour leader Angela Rayner has been granted an urgent questions in the Commons in the next half hour about upholding standards in public life. It's after a senior civil servant accused Number 10 of not telling the truth over claims Boris Johnson wasn't aware of official complaints about the MP Chris Pincher's behaviour. Downing Street says Mr Johnson was aware of unsubstantiated claims when Mr Pincher was made Deputy Chief Whip. Lord MacDonald, though, says the Prime Minister was briefed in person over investigation into Mr Pincher's conduct. In the US now, and a man's been arrested following a mass shooting at a 4th of July celebration parade in Chicago. 6 people were shot dead after a gunman opened fire with a high-powered rifle from a rooftop. Around 30 people, including a child, were seriously injured. Police say a 22-year-old suspect named as Robert El Crimo has been detained. Elsewhere in the country, 2 police officers were killed in another Independence Day celebration in Philadelphia. The mayor, Jim Kenney, says he's concerned every single day.
So everything we have in the city over the last 7 years, I worry about. I don't enjoy 4th of July. I don't enjoy the Democratic National Convention. I didn't enjoy the NFL draft. I'm waiting for something bad to happen all the time.
The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has urged police to use new powers, including imprisonment, to stop protesters causing gridlock to motorways and major roads. New measures to combat non-violent demonstrations that cause significant disruption, like blocking roads, came into effect at the end of June. Well, several arrests were made yesterday as campaigners calling for a cut in fuel duty deliberately drove slowly along major motorways. The Shadow Attorney General, Emily Thornberry, told GB News the measures need to be balanced.
So whilst it's right that people should have the opportunity to be able to express their views, as I say, we also need to bear in mind that on those roads there will be ambulances, there will be lorries taking food to shops and so forth. You know, we need to make sure the arteries of our country do remain in a healthy place.
Sweden and Finland have taken the next steps in becoming members of NATO this morning. 30 NATO allies have signed off on both Nordic countries to join the alliance. That will be the most significant expansion since the mid-1990s. Before they're officially allowed into the alliance, they must be approved by the individual parliaments of the member countries. That can take up to a year. There are new warnings that financial pressures on household budgets will intensify over the coming year. Sainsbury's chief executive Simon Roberts said the supermarket is working to reduce costs amid continuing inflation. The supermarket says sales have dropped by 4% compared to this time last year. The government has been putting pressure on firms, including retailers, to cut costs to customers. Applications to join the police force in Scotland have dropped by more than half in the last year. There were just over 2,200 applications, down from more than 5,600 the previous year. Staff are currently in a pay dispute with Police Scotland. Since Friday, officers have not been starting shifts early or taking radio equipment home when their duty ends as part of a protest. 6 people have been charged over invading the circuit at the Formula 1 British Grand Prix over the weekend. Northamptonshire Police says the group, aged between 21 and 46, have all been charged with conspiracy to cause public nuisance. They sat down on the track at Silverstone on Sunday after the race had to be stopped when one of the drivers crashed. All 6 will appear at Northampton Magistrates Court this morning. The NHS is going to trial using drones to send chemotherapy drugs, aiming to speed up deliveries of vital medicines with a short shelf life. An initial trial will see carries carried from Portsmouth to the Isle of Wight, cutting journey times from 4 hours to about 30 minutes. It's hoped the programme will pave the way for same-day delivery of medical supplies from anywhere in the country. Italy has declared a state of emergency as the north of the country suffers its worst drought in 70 years. Much of the Po River, it's the longest in Italy and stretches more than 400 miles, has run dry. Well, the lack of water is impacting a third of the country's farming land. The Italian government has imposed emergency measures like water rationing for homes and businesses. Crowds are expected to flock to Wimbledon to watch Cameron Norrie in his quarter-final match today. As Britain's last singles player standing, hopes are high for the 26-year-old. He says it's even more reason for everyone to get behind him. He's playing Belgium's David Goffin on centre court this afternoon, and of course we'll bring you the results from the match here. This is GB News. We'll bring you the news as it happens. Now, let's head to the briefing this morning with Liam.
It's 7 minutes past 12, and this is Liam Halligan with the briefing in for Gloria De Piero. Now, Prime Minister Boris Johnson hasn't had a good morning or a good week for that matter. The next chapter of the Pincher saga puts the MPs back against the wall because a former Foreign Office civil servant has accused the government of deception. Since last week, ministers have denied that the Prime Minister had been told about the specific allegations against Deputy Chief Whip Chris Pincher. But in a letter sent to the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards, Lord MacDonald of Salford, no less, the former permanent Under-Secretary to the Foreign Office, insisted the Prime Minister had been briefed about an investigation into Chris Pincher's conduct as a Foreign Office Minister. The letter says, and I quote, Mr Johnson was briefed in person about the initiation and outcome of the investigation. If there was a formal complaint, allegations were resolved only in the sense that the investigation was completed. Mr Pincher was not exonerated, according to the letter. And to characterise the allegations as unsubstantiated is therefore wrong. Joining us to disentangle this mess is our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. Darren, this story isn't going away. It's getting worse for Number 10 now, isn't it? With a former senior civil servant basically accusing ministers of being wrong.
Yeah, not just of being wrong, essentially of misleading us, you, the public out there. We are here again, aren't we, Liam, where in many ways the story is not necessarily what Chris Pincher did, though of course that is an aspect of it and it is under investigation and we know he's had the whip withdrawn, but it's how Downing Street have dealt with this. It is in many ways a bit like Partygate all over again. It's less about the crime in some ways. It's about how Downing Street have responded to some of the questions that have subsequently followed. We heard repeatedly over the weekend from Number 10, from cabinet ministers nonetheless, that as far as they were aware, the Prime Minister was not aware of any specific allegations against Chris Pincher when he was appointed Deputy Whip earlier on this year. Lord MacDonald has completely dropped a massive bombshell on that, saying, frankly, that is not true, that he personally had told Boris Johnson of some of the previous allegations against him. Allegations, it must be said, sort of complaints that were actually upheld against Chris Pincher, though he did remain in post. He did apologise for that. At the moment, Liam, all I can tell you is that the Prime Minister's spokesperson has just started the daily briefing with journalists here in Westminster. This is the same, of course, spokesperson who also reiterated that line that the Prime Minister was not aware of specifics. It's going to be fascinating to hear what he has to say, what Downing Street's official response is to Lord MacDonald, because I can tell you there are a hell of a lot of Conservative MPs who are not just concerned about all this, but pretty angry that yet again it appears, and I'm going to use that word, it appears that Downing Street may have misled people in what precisely the Prime Minister knew and when he knew it.
And many of our viewers and listeners will be tearing their hair out, so to speak. They want us to focus on cost of living issues, making their lives better. What are ministers, the government, the whole political media class going to do about that? But we're talking here, aren't we, about whether or not our Prime Minister is going to survive, whether there's going to be a change at the top. And more Westminster process. We've got those elections coming up to the 1922 committee next week, haven't we? That's the committee of Tory backbenchers. How could those elections impact the chances that the Prime Minister will stay the Prime Minister?
A lot, it must be said. To the people who say focus on the main issues, of course the government should. Of course we should. We're here to hold the government to account. But I can tell you inside Number 10, let's be frank about this, let's be honest about this. A lot of people inside Number 10 are not focusing on the big issues facing the country. They are focusing on the continuing political drama at Westminster. They're focusing on trying to save the Prime Minister. And when lots of people inside Downing Street are doing that, clearly that is where the press and the media are going to focus their attention on as well. There is no doubt that clearly the concerns about the Prime Minister's leadership is having an impact on his ability to run the country. If anyone tells you anything else, they're really not telling you the truth. I think the problem for the Prime Minister is twofold here, Liam. First of all, is that he is now so weak in his authority in many regards, given that confidence vote, that almost every story is now going to be about him when it comes to the Conservative Party, to scandal, to questions about rule breaking. At the end of the day, this is a story actually fundamentally, and it began last Thursday with allegations around one MP and his misconduct, and yet just a couple of days later it's all about Boris Johnson. And the fear for the Prime Minister is that that will carry on in the weeks and months to come, almost irrespective of the story. And the second thing is the cabinet ministers and ministers are starting to get very, very annoyed that they are every single day going out and having to defend the Prime Minister and use lines and tell stories that subsequently, in some cases, turn out not to be true. And their willingness to do that is ebbing pretty quickly. And when you get to that stage, some cabinet ministers might start to question the loyalty to the Prime Minister themselves. So it's all very tricky. As I say, this briefing this afternoon that's just started will be crucial in understanding who precisely has told the truth and who hasn't.
And finally, Darren, you and I have been covering politics for a long time. Of course, we want to focus on the issues. Of course, we want to really stress the concerns of our GB News viewers and listeners. But this is serious politics, isn't it? Does this feel like just regular political knockabout that would be, any Prime Minister would be subject to? Or is there something different happening here, in your view?
There's definitely something different happening in the sense that this should not be happening, 2.5 years into a Prime Minister's term with an 80-seat majority. This feels to me, Liam, and as you say, we've both been around the block a bit, this feels to me like what happens at the very end of a Prime Ministership, not at the beginning of it. Boris Johnson was talking about running into the 2030s. I think it is very difficult. Yes, you're going to see this election to the 1922 committee next week, though it's very difficult to have a vote of confidence when Parliament's in recess, so the Prime Minister may well be safe. There's lots of talk cabinet ministers may well resign. What I'm trying to say is the political atmosphere here at Westminster is all focused on Boris Johnson's leadership. Lots of people are asking, it's a question of when, not if. And in those circumstances, any government would find it incredibly difficult to run the day-to-day apparatus of government. And that's where the Prime Minister, frankly, this summer is going to find himself.
Darren McCaffrey, always good to talk to you. GB News political editor there, Darren McCaffrey, reporting live from Westminster on more tricky moments for Boris Johnson. Now, travel's also tricky these days, whether it's cancelled flights, train strikes or the soaring cost of petrol and diesel. Chancellor Rishi Sunak's coming under increasing pressure to cut fuel duty or face a summer of chaos on the roads, because yesterday protesters took to motorways in a slow drive demonstration across many parts of the country, and it could be the first of many. Joining me now is Howard Cox. He is founder of the Fair Fuel UK campaign. Howard, we meet again, we talk again. It's the same old subject, the cost of fuel.
I know, Liam, it's good to be on your show, my friend. Yeah, what we're seeing now is law-abiding citizens, decent people, truck drivers. These people are at the end of their tether and they're protesting and they're shouting at the government, listen to us, reduce the price of fuel before it gets even more crippling. If you don't do it soon, there's going to be a lot more protests, and some of these protests could get even more serious.
Now, we should say, as I always do when I talk to you, Howard, whether it's here on the briefing, Gloria show, my own show, On the Money, here on GB News, which will follow in the next hour. You are partly funded by the Road Haulage Association. You're always open about that. But you have, over many months now, unearthed some really interesting figures, which are just objectively true, on the extent to which petrol and diesel prices are rising, even when the cost of oil, crude oil, is falling. To what extent do you think ministers are taking that seriously, the idea that we are being made to endure unfair increases in the cost of fuel on the forecourts, that the big petrol retailers, rather than the small independent ones, are taking advantage of an inflationary environment to push up those prices unduly?
Well, bluntly, the ministers are in cloud cuckoo land. They're not listening at all. It's ridiculous. When you see Germany cutting fuel duty by 25 pence, France 13, Ireland 17 and Spain 20 pence, they're getting on top of this, and they recognise the cost of living crisis is not just a phrase that's thrown around all the time glibly by people. I was on a show this morning, just after Dominic Raab, and he said, we're doing lots of good stuff. We're pumping 37 billion into the economy to make sure we help people feeling the pinch, which is a bit of, shouldn't use pincher, sorry, pinch. But from the point of view of actually what people are actually feeling at the pumps, this is debilitating, it's crippling. The haulage industry, as you quite rightly pointed out, the road haulage industry have backed Fair Fuel UK for 11 years, and their members are suffering terribly. and the impact of what's costing them is something like 50 to 60% of their costs are fuel. What's happening to them is that they have trying to pass those prices on down through the product supply chain all the way to shops, etc. But some of them aren't being able to do that because some of their customers aren't taking those price increases because they can't sell anything anymore. So the whole thing is simple. Cut the costs to the industry, cut the costs to business, and most importantly, cut the costs to drivers and small and hard-pressed small families.
The trouble is, though, Howard, you know this better than me, that as the cost of fuel goes up on the forecourt, VAT is a fixed percentage of that fuel. So the rising cost of fuel, it's a cash cow for the government, isn't it? Even if the percentage of tax stays the same, the actual amount of money they get in from motorists, from hauliers, from people trying to keep the economy on the move goes up and up and up. So ministers have every incentive, don't they, to leave things as they are. How are we going to change that?
Yeah, but that's not a popular approach, is it? Because you're absolutely right. You hit it right on the head, my friend. 3 billion to 4 billion of extra VAT has been generated in the last year alone. That's extra VAT. They've also got a 5 billion bonanza windfall tax they're getting from the high profits of oil companies. That's nearly 10 billion of cash washing about. That is even more than the 20p we're calling for a cut in fuel duty. And the most important thing about this is because that 5p cut we got back in March didn't touch the size. They need to police anything they do if they cut fuel duty, and they need to introduce pump watch. As you know, I've been banging on about pump watch with Robert Halfon MP for the last 3 to 4 years. And unfortunately, this government doesn't seem to be in touch with reality. The only good thing they've done is because the 5p cut in fuel duty wasn't passed on, they've introduced or asked the Competitions and Market Authority to inquire into where that fuel duty cut went, what happened to it. But they need to go even deeper because this opportunistic profiteering further up the fuel supply chain, and you quite rightly point out, these small independent retailers, they're not making much margin. It's definitely further up the fuel supply chain with oil companies and big wholesalers and speculators.
Howard, I'd like to say it's always a pleasure, but it isn't, my friend. It isn't a pleasure talking endlessly about these things, but it is a necessary distraction from normal life. We need to keep pressing. We need to keep highlighting the extent of that tax take on fuel, on petrol and diesel. Howard Cox there of the Fair Fuel UK campaign. Thanks for joining us. Now, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer pledged yesterday in a keynote speech, though he wasn't prepared for the speech to be filmed or to take questions, not to take the UK back into the European Union single market. Make Brexit work is apparently the new slogan for the Labour Party, which plans to move on from criticism of being on the fence about the outcome of the 2016 EU referendum, criticism which doesn't go down across those red wall seats, which many cases backed Brexit, that Labour must regain to win power. The new Labour plan wants acceptance of the referendum result, we're told, while tackling what Starmer describes as the negative economic impact of leaving the European Union. Joining us now is our Northern Ireland reporter, Doogie Beattie. Doogie, what might this renewed Labour stance, this new acceptance, we're told, of the referendum results mean not just for Northern Ireland in general, but for ongoing wranglings between the UK and the EU about that vexed question of the Northern Ireland Protocol?
Well, I don't know who was advising Keir Starmer, but he chose to have his speech in the Irish Embassy, of all places. I spent a bit of time with him a few weeks ago when he visited Dublin and Belfast, and the unionist population here were not amused with him. They said that the Irish Taoiseach was definitely defending the Irish side of the protocol, and they wanted Britain to defend the British side of it. And Keir Starmer didn't do that. In that speech last night, unionist politicians are quite angry about it, that he did not address the key problems around the protocol, and they are the constitutional issues in and around it. Even Tony Blair, the last leader of the Labour Party to actually make it in on his own votes into number 10, said that the protocol and the Good Friday Agreement are not compatible. Both cannot exist at once. I suppose it's sort of a Harry Potter Voldemort moment, if you like. But if he's saying it, and they're not addressing it, they're not actually looking at trying to get anything back up and running inside Northern Ireland. And if anything this morning, I think he's made it worse in Northern Ireland instead of better, and those institutions that should have been up and running may now be a little bit further away.
Look, let's try and put a positive gloss on this, Doogie. However, it might be an example of hope over experience. But if the Labour Party really wants to break Brexit work now, it knows it can't upset those red wall seats who were angry at the Labour Party in many cases, and Keir Starmer in particular, for spending those 3 years of the Brexit wars from 2016 to 2019 trying to reverse Brexit. That was his stated aim, a second referendum. If the Labour Party is now more constructive, more positive, might it be that with the government under less pressure in Parliament to, let's get a resolution to the protocol, that may give the British government a bit more leverage, a bit more firepower when it goes up against what many people would call an increasingly intransigent European Union?
Well, Keir Starmer is talking about giving up the toys, really. I mean, he's talking about a single veterinary agreement, etc., going in there. And the one thing that our farmers right across the UK, right across Northern Ireland, have found at this is the regulations and legislation that have been forced on them by the EU over year after year. And then they find that the grain, the potash, the nitrogen's all coming from outside the EU. The meat is coming from Brazil and Argentina, and they're being forced into this regulatory corral, if you like, and having to be more expensive to produce their food. That's not going to go down well either. But what they're talking about, this is as David Cameron left all over again. If Britain had have struck as soon as the referendum was in, you would imagine at that stage that the EU would have been caught in the back foot. But because of that time left and the weakening and splitting and dividing of Westminster, it actually allowed EU to dictate terms. And this is being seen very much as Keir Starmer senses an election's coming. He's looking to go for the middle ground. People in Britain are looking to go in times of need. They're looking for someone that will stand up for them. And I think that's probably where Keir Starmer is not looking.
Doogie, do you see any sign of a resumption of power sharing anytime soon?
If you'd have asked me yesterday, I'd have said it could well be on the cards the first week in September. After that speech, we're not too sure here at all. I think he may have done more to put things back rather than sort of patch them up and bring them forward.
Doogie Beattie, good to speak to you as ever. Doogie Beattie there, our GB News Northern Ireland correspondent. Now, the UK armed forces have been cut right back in recent years, but now that Russia's invaded Ukraine, is it time for a bigger army? The Labour MP for Huddersfield, the veteran parliamentarian Barry Sherman, says it is the right time. He'll be with me in a moment. Stay with us.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go? Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
And welcome back. This is The Briefing with me, Liam Halligan, in for Gloria De Piero. Now, the UK's military might have waned in recent years, but it's when it seemed like wars in Europe were a thing of the past. But the world changed with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, so some now say the British Armed Forces, Army, Navy and Air Force need to be beefed up rather than pared back. Barry Shearman's Labour MP for Huddersfield and has a debate in Parliament this afternoon on precisely this issue, numbers in the British Army. And he joins me now. Barry, good to have you with us as ever. Where do you think we should be? Current numbers in the Army are around 80,000. Our total armed forces are just under 150,000, including Navy and Air Force. These are historic lows. Do you have a number in mind?
I've had a campaign on this for many years. Back in 2010, I told the government that I was very worried that we were going to dip below 100,000 men and women in the armed services, and I thought that was precariously low for a leading NATO nation. And of course, we have seen a steady and quite worrying decline over these last 10 years. And of course, the most recent decline is the planned decline of taking our overall forces down to 72,000 men and women. I think that's far too low. And all these arguments that we're going to have more technology, we're going to have more drones, all that sort of stuff, it doesn't wash with me. You actually, at the end of the day, have to have well-armed men and women ready to go to protect our country.
People are expensive, Barry Shearman, not just, of course, in human terms, loss of life and so on, but also in terms of money spent. Does that mean you want to see the defence budget going up significantly from 2% to 3 or even 4% of GDP? How high do you think defence spending should go, Barry?
At the moment, I would keep it to the promises that Boris Johnson and the government made in the last election campaign, where he pledged that it would remain substantially above inflation. He's reneged on that promise. He also made really strong promises about keeping it at 2%. We know that the way things are going, it's going to dip well below 2% of GDP. So, keeping to promises, keeping to pledges would help. But long term, I listen to, I'm not a defence expert, but I listen to the experts. And leading generals and leading people who know about this stuff say they're deeply worried that we don't have the forces that would deter Mr. Putin if he decided to broaden the war in Europe. This is a bloody and brutal invasion of a peaceful nation, and we have got to have the right kinds of army and the right numbers of army well equipped in order to deal with him.
No one would deny, Barry Shearman, that what's happening in Ukraine, Russia's actions haven't changed the geostrategic outlook, the minds of many of us. To what extent do you think, if you want to spend more money, that money has to be found somewhere? What would you cut in order to generate that extra revenue to expand the Army, Navy and Air Force as you want? Or would you raise taxes?
Well, I think a mixture of both. My constituents tell me that the defence of our nation is their number one priority because they've been woken up by these dreadful, terrifying emergence of Russia as a very dangerous power across Europe. We've we've been asleep for a very long time, and my constituents are telling me that defence of our nation is, as it always should be, the #1 priority. And many of them say to me, I'm willing to pay more taxes, Mr. Chairman. I'm willing to forego one of these expensive infrastructure investments like HS2 in order to pay for a proper defence force. And of course, in the day, we had recruitment offices in every town. We encouraged people to join the army. It was the biggest trainer of skilled men and women in the country. All that's gone. And I think it's about time we looked again, started reinvesting, and of course, with a constituency where we still make the gears for Challenger tanks, you know, the fact that much of our equipment is now out of date and has to be reintroduced and refurbed. That's worrying as well.
Barry Shearman, MP for Huddersfield, you got your debate on our armed services in the Commons this afternoon. You want our Army, Navy and Air Force to expand, and I'm sure quite a few of our GB News viewers and listeners will agree with you. For now, thanks a lot for joining us here on GB News on The Briefing. In just a moment, we could be going live to the Commons as Deputy Leader Angela Rayner asked an urgent question. But for now, let's return once again to the GB News headlines with Rosie Wright.
Good afternoon, it's 12:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. The Deputy Labour leader, Angela Rayner, has been granted an urgent question in the Commons about upholding standards in public life. It's after a senior civil servant accused Number 10 of not telling the truth over claims Boris Johnson wasn't aware of official complaints about the MP Chris Pincher's behaviour. Downing Street says Mr Johnson was aware of unsubstantiated claims when Mr Pincher was made Deputy Chief Whip. Lord MacDonald, though, says the Prime Minister was briefed in person over an investigation into Mr Pincher's conduct. As soon as she asks that urgent question, we'll bring it to you here. Now, a public inquiry into the death of an unarmed father of two conclude that he was lawfully killed, but found there were numerous failures throughout the operation. 28-year-old Jermaine Baker was shot at close range by police whilst taking part in an attempted prison break in 2015. He was one of 3 men waiting in a stolen Audi trying to help 2 inmates escape a prison van. In the US, a man's been arrested following a mass shooting at a 4th of July parade in Chicago. 6 people were shot dead and 30 were seriously injured after a gunman opened fire with a high-powered rifle from a rooftop. Police say a 22-year-old suspect named Robert E. Crimbo has been detained. Sweden and Finland have taken the next steps in becoming members of NATO this morning. 30 NATO allies have signed off on the Nordic countries joining the alliance. It's the most significant expansion since the mid-1990s. Now, each individual parliaments of all the member countries gives approval. That can take up to a year. The Home Secretary has urged police to use new powers, including imprisonment, to stop protesters causing gridlock on motorways and major roads. New measures to combat non-violent demonstrations that cause significant disruption, like road blocking, came into effect at the end of June. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. We'll go to the Commons as soon as Angela Rayner has her moment to ask that urgent question. Shortly, though, we'll be back to Liam and The Briefing.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up.
And welcome back. This is The Briefing with me, Liam Halligan, standing in for Gloria De Piero. We are now going live to the House of Commons, where Shadow Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, has an urgent question on mechanisms for upholding standards in public life. We're hearing, first of all, from Michael Ellis MP.
The system is multifaceted. It is made up of interlocking and complementary elements. It is, of course, founded on the 7 principles of public life, which have been in place for a quarter of a century, and which provide the overarching qualities and standards of behaviour that are expected. And, Mr. Speaker, I have some time to run through all of the mechanisms that underpin the 7 principles, but I'll touch on something else first, and that is this. And it is something with regard to the potential victims in any case where there are allegations of impropriety of any sort. I was a barrister in criminal practice for 17 years before being elected to this House, and I know how difficult it is for individuals to come forward. It is very important that we do not prejudge any individual case. It is also right that the system that, after all, this House created, and relatively recently, namely the Independent Complaints and Grievance Scheme, is allowed to work its course. Mr. Speaker, there are additional rules and guidance to help ensure consistency of approach. For example, in relation to public appointments, corporate governance and business appointments when individuals move to roles outside of government. And, Mr. Speaker, there are independent bodies that provide a broad oversight of standards. The Right Honourable Lady, the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, has asked about the mechanisms for upholding those standards, and they exist as a result of the decisions of this House. There are bodies and there are office holders with a role in overseeing specific aspects of public life, such as the Parliamentary Commissioner on Standards, the Civil Service Commission, the Commissioner for Public Appointments, and alongside these there are regimes for the publication of government transparency data and information on those who lobby government. So we do have a Parliament, Mr. Speaker, as you know, that upholds standards to cover all of those in public life. But it is incumbent upon us not to prejudge these decisions. Ministers, public office holders, officials in all of their activities must maintain the confidentiality of those who wish to make complaints across the lifetime of their involvement. But let me say that no system can replace the fundamental importance of personal responsibility. We all know this to be true. Codes and rules and oversight bodies are there to guide us, but we all ultimately, in public life, must choose for ourselves how to act.
We now go to Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, but this constant charade just will not wash. These latest disturbing allegations about the ministerial misconduct are all about abuse of power. And there is one common fault, Mr. Speaker, with the system currently that the Minister spoke about, and that's the power that's granted by this Prime Minister. The Minister spoke about personal responsibility. Well, the Minister needs to remind the Prime Minister of his personal responsibility. Last week, the Prime Minister said that he knew nothing of specific allegations about misconduct by the member for Tamworth. Then he claimed he had only been aware of reports and speculation. But, Mr. Speaker, the truth is out today, and that defence has been completely blown apart. Lord MacDonald says the Prime Minister was informed about the complaint that was upheld of inappropriate behaviour against the then Minister. Does the Minister here accept Lord MacDonald is telling the truth? Or is he telling us the Prime Minister wasn't aware of it? What happened to the complaint, Mr. Speaker, and why was nothing done at the time? A Minister of State at the Foreign Office has a deeply sensitive role in national security. Was this issue even raised or brought up in the vetting process, and was the Prime Minister informed? And why was this conduct not considered a breach of the ministerial code? Why did the Prime Minister allow him to stay in post? This goes to the heart of wider issues here, Mr. Speaker, and the public have had enough. Since the resignation of yet another of the Prime Minister's ethics advisers last month, there has been an even bigger ethical vacuum in Downing Street with no accountability in place. How can the Minister come here today and say that this simply just wouldn't happen again? The Prime Minister was personally informed about these allegations, and yet he was either negligent or complicit. What message, Mr. Speaker, does this send about the standards of this government and what they set? What message does this send to the British people facing a cost of living crisis while their government is paralysed with scandal? When will this minister stop defending the indefensible and say enough is enough?
Minister Ellis.
Mr. Speaker, the matter of what happened with regards to the member for Tamworth is now under investigation. And it is possible that a police investigation may follow. So it is clear that the sub judice rule should apply to individual cases, both because of the interests of justice to everyone concerned, both to those accused and those who are potential victims. So the sub judice rule should apply very much to this debate. But with regards to the appointment that the Right Honourable Lady mentions to the Whip's office in February, appointments in government are subject, of course, to advice on matters of propriety, not to veto, but they are subject to advice. And in addition, the usual reshuffle procedures were followed by government. I asked the House to accept that, bearing in mind the member in question had been reappointed to government by a previous Prime Minister in 2018, and then that he had been appointed in 2019 as a Foreign Office Minister, and then, crucially, that he was appointed for a third time in February. I doubt whether anyone could, in knowledge of those facts, say that this Prime Minister should have acted otherwise than he did. It is the morally fair thing to do in any case. It is the morally fair thing to do in any case to assess the situation based on evidence, not unsubstantiated rumour. It's incumbent on all of us in this House, as it is in society generally, to act fairly. If there is no evidence at the time, if there's no live complaint, no ongoing investigation, surely it is not unreasonable to consider making an appointment. Now, I have made some initial inquiries subject to, this is subject to further assessment, but in the limited amount of time available, my understanding is as follows. In October 2019, officials raised concerns with the Permanent Secretary concerning the member in question. The Permanent Secretary commissioned work to establish facts. That was undertaken on his behalf by the Cabinet Office. This exercise reported in due course to the then Permanent Secretary, who had agreed its terms. The exercise established that while the Minister meant no harm, what had occurred caused a high level of discomfort. This is what the exercise established. The Minister apologised, and those raising the concern accepted the resolution. The Prime Minister was made aware of this issue in late 2019. He was told that the Permanent Secretary had taken the necessary action. No issue, therefore, arose about remaining as a minister. And last week, when fresh allegations arose, the Prime Minister did not immediately recall the conversation in late 2019 about this incident. As soon as he was reminded, the Number 10 press office corrected their public lines. So the position is quite clear. Further inquiries will be made, but the position is that the Prime Minister acted with probity at all times. It is not appropriate, whether in private life or in public life, to act on unsubstantiated rumour.
We now come to the Chair of the Committee, William Bragg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend mentions the sophisticated and robust systems for upholding standards in public life, but those systems are, on the whole, irrelevant if the participants have no regard for them. The question that faces the government, and I would suggest my honourable and right honourable friends sat on the front bench, and I notice a greater degree of propensity of government whips rather than other ministers at this time, is for them to consider what they are being asked to say in public, which changes seemingly by the hour. And I would ask them to consider, Mr. Speaker, the common sense of decency that I know the vast, vast majority of them have, and ask themselves if they can any longer tolerate being part of a government which, for better or worse, is widely regarded of having lost its sense of direction. It is for them to consider their positions. This is not a question of systems. It is a question of political judgment, and that political judgment cannot be delegated.
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is quite wrong. The fact of the matter is, this is a government that knows its direction, and that is to serve the British people in dealing with the issues that matter to them, including cost of living, the crisis in Ukraine, and those other issues, including the pandemic, which this Prime Minister and this government have dealt with in an exemplary fashion.
Come to SNP spokesperson Brendan O'Hara.
Well, here we are again, Mr. Speaker. Once again, the Minister for Defending the Indefensible is sent out to defend his boss, but even he must realise...
Paymaster General Michael Ellis there, defending the government's position, taking brickbats, not just from Angela Rayner, Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, over the latest in the Pincher saga after a former Foreign Office civil servant said that the Prime Minister was briefed in person about allegations against the then Deputy Chief Whip Chris Pincher MP for Tamworth, allegations of sexual misconduct. Also, you heard there from William Ragg, who is the Vice Chair of the 1922 Committee. That's the committee of Tory backbench MPs, suggesting that ministers examine their conscience over the extent to which they are defending the government's position. William Ragg, it should be said, is a long-standing critic from the government backbenches of Boris Johnson. And that story will, of course, run and run. Now, Johnny Wood's been campaigning for 4 years to toughen sentences for dangerous driving. That's because his sister Jacqueline Wildman was killed in 2018 after being hit by a stolen lorry. New legislation came into place last week, with killer drivers now possibly facing life in prison, scrapping the previous 14-year maximum term. And Johnny Wood joins me in the studio now, and his MP Steph Peacock also joins us down the line. Johnny, Steph Peacock will join us in a moment. Firstly, just let me say how sorry I am about the death of your sister, Jacqueline Wildman. She was just 58 when she died in 2018. She left behind not just grieving family, her brother, yourself, but also 2 grown-up children, your nephew and niece. There has been a law change. It's been a long journey for you and your family. Tell us about the determination that you felt after she was so tragically and wrongfully killed by a truck being driven illegally.
When you're in a court of law and you're actually witness your sister being hit with a stolen lorry, bear in mind it was 8 1/4 ton lorry travelling at 56 mile an hour in a 30 mile an hour zone.
Right, almost twice.
Yeah. And you hear a judge, top QC in this country, turn around and say that he would like to give the criminals or the 4 lowlifes, and I'm being polite there, a lot bigger sentence, but it was restricted because of the law, then that prompted me then to take some form of action, get in touch with my MP and make changes in the law. It's not right that a judge should be restricted. You see, what we have in this country is we have everything's in place to help and assist the criminal, and there's nothing in place for the victims.
Now, your MP in Barnsley, Steph Peacock, has helped you. We got a few communications issues. I don't think she's going to be able to join us.
Right.
We apologise for that, but we really want to hear from you. But I'd just like you to mention Steph and tell us the extent to which your MP has helped you, if indeed you feel that she has.
Yeah, well, when we came out of the law courts, I actually did stipulate that I would be going to see my MP and put it to her that this law wants changing. I did approach Stephanie and Dan Jarvis and Council Leader Steve Alton and also the Crime Commissioner in a meeting in Barnsley Town Hall. We all got together and Stephanie said that she would take it on board. And we in nowadays is that all MPs are saying, well, I'm telling you people of this country, you've got it wrong. When you've got an MP like Stephanie Peacock that stands up and fights for her community, which she has done, she's been totally behind our family, she's been second to none.
Can't bring your sister back, though. You must, of course, and our condolences to you and chapeau for your bravery and determination. I'm sure there's been many, many bleak moments for you and your family missing your beloved sister. But you must feel some satisfaction, Johnny, that the system's worked, albeit in a tragic way. You've managed, with your MP, to get the law changed.
We've managed to get the law changed, but to say that the system's worked, it hasn't. Because in every section of the law, all the way through this case, we've seen a flaw and we've seen problems and issues. And whereas I see it, by the way, I've had 4 years of hell, but I've also had 4 years of education on the law and the system itself, and where there's problems. The 4 characters that was in the lorry, 1 had actually killed by death by dangerous driving before.
Wow.
1 was on probation, and there was an internal investigation into that. The one that was driving in Carnhill, he'd no driving licence whatsoever, and the other one that was in, he was a local drug dealer. That day, it was as though that there was a terrorist act that had happened in Barnsley itself. Bearing in mind it was a stolen lorry, it was being looked for by the police over a 3-day period. Now, if that would have happened in London and there had been a stolen lorry, the police would have been out straight away. Metropolitan, they'd have all been round it. But because it's a little town in the north, is that we're not getting assistance. We've had cutbacks. We've had cutbacks on police. The probation service were part privatised. There's been flaws all the way through. That law that we managed to change should have been implemented in 2017, bearing in mind that Jacqueline got killed in 2018. So even the law, the government need to hold their hand up on this and take some form of responsibility, is that they failed our family, the lack of police failed our family, the probation service failed our family, and when you get to court and you see the crimes that were committed, it wasn't just death by dangerous driving or aggravated vehicle taking. What had happened on that day, the car had gone round the corner travelling at 56 miles an hour. Hit one car and he never applied the brakes. He hit another car, never applied the brakes. Then he mowed my sister down, never applied the brakes. Hit another car, never applied the brakes, and then went into an house and demolished that house and never applied the brakes all the way through it.
Well, Johnny, it's an absolute tragedy. You are going to see a Home Office Minister this afternoon.
That's right.
Get back in touch with us, let us know how it goes. But for now, our condolences to you and your family, but huge respect to you.
Thank you.
And indeed to your MP, who you have highlighted her positive role in getting the law changed in the memory of your late sister, Jacqueline Wildman.
Thank you.
Johnny Gold there, joining us in the GB News studio from Barnsley. Up next, join me for my regular On the Money show. Over the next hour, we will be discussing all kinds of things. We'll be discussing APP. What's that? That's authorised push payment fraud. It's a form of online scamming that soared during lockdown as we all ended up buying a lot more and doing a lot more business online. That will be me on the money in the next hour. This has been me presenting you with the briefing in for Gloria De Piero. Thanks for your company over the last hour, and I look forward to seeing you again after the news and the weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGivern from the Met Office. Fine for many today, a lot of cloud around, and it will be damp in the northwest later. But for the time being, actually plenty of dry, settled, bright weather thanks to an area of high pressure which is edging closer from the west. Weather fronts are approaching, however, around the top of that high, and they will bring some thicker cloud and some rain to Northern Ireland and Scotland later in the day. But for the time being, the thickest cloud actually is across Wales, the Midlands, East Anglia, and that's sinking south into southern parts of England, along with a few outbreaks of rain in places, 1 or 2 showers disappearing from northeast Scotland. And it's across central and eastern Scotland, northern England, where we'll see the best of the sunny spells. 18 to 20 Celsius in the north, 22, 23 Celsius for southern areas. But for many, it's a cool-ish day, and then it turns increasingly damp for Scotland, and there'll be some thicker cloud and some drizzle for Northern Ireland as well. Rain spilling into northern England, North Wales as well overnight, and the wind picking up. So with the breeze and the increasing cloud for most, it's a mild night. Stays clear in the southeast, and here it's a sunny start to the day. There'll be a warmer start compared to this morning, but for many it's a cloudy day, and it will be breezy in the north with the wind gusting over hills and around coasts. Outbreaks of rain, particularly for western Scotland, but they'll be on and off for Northern Ireland, eastern Scotland, northern England, and it will feel cool in the north, but much warmer in the south, 25, 26, perhaps even 27 Celsius. And then we continue to see the breeze and those outbreaks of rain push through Scotland and parts of Northern Ireland overnight. But eventually the rain eases away. And Thursday's a drier day for many, with plenty of sunshine, particularly in the south. Friday, Saturday look increasingly sunny across the country and warmer.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
And it's me again at 1 p.m. Welcome to On the Money, where we're focused on the UK's cost of living crisis, helping you beat the squeeze. I am Liam Halligan. And for the next hour, we'll be talking about online fraud, which surged during lockdown. Over